Recent events strongly suggest that the vulnerabilities inherent in President Donald Trump's highly personalized and rapid-fire approach to international peacemaking are now being exposed, following the swift resurgence of conflicts in regions where his administration had recently claimed diplomatic breakthroughs. For much of his second term, the president leveraged the imposing weight of American economic and military pressure, often delivering ultimatums, to bring deeply entrenched adversaries to the negotiation table, resulting in what were initially hailed as remarkably fast peace accords. Consider the high-profile success witnessed in June, when the foreign ministers of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda formalized an agreement intended to conclude 3 decades of hostilities, a signing ceremony presided over by President Trump himself. Administration officials at the time highlighted the immediate benefit, forecasting that the deal would unlock billions of dollars in potential U.S. investment into the mineral-rich Eastern Congo region.
Similarly, weeks later, when tensions flared dangerously across the disputed border between Cambodia and Thailand, the president threatened to suspend ongoing tariff negotiations with both nations unless they immediately agreed to dialogue. This threat appeared effective, given that both nations were subject to significant 36% U.S. tariffs, leading to a swift ceasefire and culminating in a comprehensive peace agreement signed during a White House ceremony in October.
While many political analysts commended the Trump administration for engaging in conflicts that often fall outside the traditional core focus of U.S. strategic interests, many also issued strong cautionary assessments. The prevailing analytical hypothesis centered on the idea that these Trump-facilitated agreements were largely superficial, having failed to adequately address the deep-seated, often historical, root causes of the conflicts.
Furthermore, it was widely observed that these pacts frequently lacked clearly defined timelines or robust, specific mechanisms for monitoring and implementation enforcement. The concern articulated by experts was that peace settlements established too hastily, without a secure foundational basis and lacking sustainable buy-in, face an extremely high risk of rapid disintegration. Should these fragile arrangements collapse, the result is likely to be a catastrophic erosion of trust between the former rivals, critically weakening any future prospects for a permanent end to hostilities. The White House press secretary did appear to concede the inherent difficulty of the task, noting that peace is not an easy process, which is why President Trump and the American National Security Team have worked tirelessly to bring about lasting peace in conflicts around the world. However, when pressed to elaborate on the concrete mechanisms put in place to ensure the longevity of these delicate peace agreements, the spokesperson only offered the assertion that President Trump fully expected all parties to comprehensively honor the commitments they had made upon signing. The spokesperson added vaguely that when necessary, the president will hold them accountable to end a killing and ensure enduring peace, no matter who they are, yet notably failed to specify what those enforcement measures might entail. The events of the past week have unfortunately validated this cautious mindset regarding the sustainability of these arrangements. In Southeast Asia, the peace agreement inked in Kuala Lumpur, for instance, primarily mandated a ceasefire and the withdrawal of heavy weaponry, but critically failed to resolve the core disagreement over the borderline drawn on a 1909 map by France, the former colonial power in Cambodia, a map Thailand has long rejected. Just last month, the Thai government suspended further negotiations regarding the next phase of the truce, which included the planned release of 18 Cambodian prisoners, after 2 Thai soldiers were injured by an anti-personnel mine near the contested border. Thai officials immediately accused Cambodia of recently planting the device, an accusation Phnom Penh stauchly denied, claiming the mine was residual ordnance from previous conflicts. After 6 weeks of uneasy truce, open combat unexpectedly erupted again on December 8th, with both sides trading accusations of firing the first shots. The escalation quickly led to the deployment of heavy military hardware, including F-16 fighter jets, heavy artillery, and rocket launchers targeting enemy positions. Simultaneously, in the eastern DRC, a parallel and equally concerning collapse of the June peace accord was unfolding. Armed combatants affiliated with the M23 rebel group, a force which the U.S., various Western governments, and the United Nations strongly believe is actively supported by Rwanda, significantly intensified their offensive operations, rapidly seizing territory. On December 10th, the group claimed control of Uvira,
a strategically vital town in the DRC. UN reports indicate that the renewed fighting has resulted in the displacement of at least 200,000 people and claimed the lives of at least 74, further exacerbating what is widely regarded as one of the world's most severe humanitarian crises. Crucially, this M23 offensive occurred only days after Congolese President Félix Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Paul Kagame had traveled to Washington to meet with President Trump, an encounter intended to reaffirm their commitment to the June peace accord and to sign a supplementary series of economic agreements primarily focused on the DRC's abundant mineral wealth. Speaking on national television on December 8th, President Tshisekedi declared, "Despite our good faith and the recently adopted agreement, it is patently clear that Rwanda has violated its commitments." He alleged that Rwandan troops were actively fighting alongside the M23 rebels, who claimed to be defending the rights of the ethnic Tutsi population residing in Congo. Rwandan officials, while denying any support for M23, retaliated by accusing the Congolese military of violating the peace terms and bringing soldiers from neighboring Burundi into the conflict. It is important to recall that the conflict in eastern Congo has roots stretching back to the 1994 Rwandan genocide, and while M23 was not a direct signatory to the June peace agreement, both Rwanda and Congo had committed to ceasing all support for armed groups operating across the region. On December 9th, the United States joined 8 European nations in a unified call for M23 and the Rwandan military to immediately cease offensive operations in the eastern DRC. The fragility of Trump's agreements is also being tested elsewhere, notably in the Middle East, where the ceasefire brokered between Israel and Hamas, perhaps his most prominent foreign policy success to date, has seen several steps backward. While the October ceasefire successfully ended fierce fighting in Gaza and secured the release of all remaining Israeli hostages, violence has flared recurrently since then, with each side accusing the other of violating the terms. Palestinian health authorities indicate that Israel has been responsible for the deaths of 379 people in Gaza since the agreement, while Hamas gunmen have killed 3 Israeli soldiers. The intended second phase of the ceasefire, aimed at constructing a permanent peace, has stalled due to deep disagreements, chief among them Hamas's refusal to disarm its fighters. Responding to the renewed violence in Asia, President Trump commented on December 11th that he planned to speak with the leaders of both Cambodia and Thailand. "I think they are 2 great leaders, 2 wonderful people, and I worked the deal out once.
I think I can get them to stop fighting," he stated confidently. However, there are numerous indicators suggesting that the challenge this time around will prove significantly more complicated for the American president. Thai Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul has publicly dismissed the possibility of immediate negotiations with the Cambodian government, and his military commanders have stated their intent to militarily degrade the adversary to a point where they no longer pose a threat.
From now on, Cambodia must comply with Thailand's conditions if they want the fighting to end, Anutin declared on December 8th, signaling a hardened stance that may necessitate a new and perhaps unavailable pressure point for President Trump. Given that the U.S. has already secured the tariff agreements with Thailand, the administration appears to possess fewer obvious levers of influence to compel Bangkok to return to the negotiating table with Phnom Penh. Furthermore, beyond vague calls for de-escalation, specific details regarding a comprehensive plan for forcing the DRC and Rwanda to cease support for proxy violence have yet to be disclosed. Kevin Chen, a specialist at Singapore's S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, perhaps encapsulated the core critique best, noting that the simultaneous collapse of the ceasefires between Cambodia and Thailand and the DRC and Rwanda clearly demonstrates that achieving durable peace cannot be rushed and demands far more than isolated political breakthroughs. Chin suggested that President Trump's peacemaking efforts resemble affixing a temporary band-aid to a deep geopolitical wound and then declaring the job finished, warning that if smaller nations perceive themselves as being forced into accepting untenable terms, the likely outcome is severe long-term consequences for regional stability. The hypothesis presented that President Trump's high-speed peacemaking efforts resemble affixing a temporary band-aid to a deep geopolitical wound and then declaring the job finished, is perhaps best substantiated by examining the intricate geopolitical fissures that quickly reopened in the wake of diplomatic breakthroughs.
One might argue that the very architecture of these rapid peace agreements contained inherent vulnerabilities, particularly regarding the failure to address the underlying historical animosities and territorial disputes that fuel these conflicts. If we look closely at the resurgence of violence along the disputed border between Cambodia and Thailand, we observe a complex situation where the initial quick fix merely deferred the inevitable confrontation.
The Kuala Lumpur Agreement, celebrated in October, stipulated only a cessation of fire and the withdrawal of heavy weaponry, notably sidestepping the core disagreement regarding the 1909 border map drawn by colonial France, a map consistently rejected by Thailand. It is a plausible interpretation that the haste to secure a signing ceremony in the presence of the American president prioritized optics over substance, leaving the fundamental question of territorial sovereignty entirely unresolved.
The fragility of this arrangement became acutely apparent just 6 weeks after the supposed peace accord. Last month, negotiations concerning the next phases of the ceasefire, including the release of 18 Cambodian prisoners, were suspended by Bangkok following an incident where Thai soldiers were injured by a landmine near the border. While Thai officials explicitly accused Cambodia of newly laying the ordnance, Phnom Penh issued a counterclaim, asserting that the mines were legacy remnants from previous conflicts. This immediate breakdown in trust, amplified by mutual accusations, serves as a clear indication that deep-seated suspicions had not been ameliorated by the diplomatic exercise. Consequently, on the 8th of December, the ceasefire collapsed entirely, replaced by renewed hostilities utilizing sophisticated weaponry, including F-16 fighter jets, heavy artillery, and rocket systems, as both nations accused the other of initiating the conflict. The escalation suggests a significant deterioration in the relationship that even the initial American pressure could not sustain. For the American administration, the challenge of intervening a second time appears markedly more complex. President Trump indicated his intent to speak with the respective leaders, expressing confidence that he could broker a second ceasefire, yet the strategic leverage previously employed, the threat of high tariffs, appears diminished since the tariff agreement with both countries had already been finalized following the October deal. Compounding this difficulty is the now hardened stance articulated by Thai Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul, who reportedly rejected the possibility of immediate negotiations and whose military commanders publicly vowed to degrade their adversary to the point where they no longer pose a threat. It is likely that Bangkok's strengthened position suggests a perceived freedom from immediate American economic consequence, requiring the White House to perhaps devise an entirely new pressure mechanism, the specifics of which remain wholly unclear. Simultaneously, across the globe, the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo demonstrates a parallel fragility in the Congo-Rwanda agreement brokered in June. The roots of this conflict are profoundly complex, stemming largely from the aftermath of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, and multiple generations of diplomats have failed to achieve sustainable peace. While the agreement secured a commitment from both Kinshasa and Kigali to cease support for armed groups operating in the mineral-rich Eastern Congo, the M23 rebel group, which Western governments and the UN assert receives backing from Rwanda, significantly ramped up its offensive shortly after the signing. This group, notably, was not an official signatory to the initial peace accord, highlighting a significant structural flaw in the deal's comprehensiveness. The intensity of the fighting dramatically increased in early December, culminating in M23 taking control of the strategic town of Uvira. UN reports indicate a devastating humanitarian toll, with estimates of at least 74 fatalities and 200,000 people recently displaced, further worsening an already dire humanitarian crisis. This resurgence of violence came mere days after President Tshisekedi of the DRC and President Kagame of Rwanda met with President Trump in Washington to reaffirm their commitment and sign a new series of economic agreements focused on the Congo's vast mineral resources. President Tshisekedi publicly stated on December 8 that, notwithstanding the recent agreements, it was evident that Rwanda had violated its commitments, accusing the Rwandan military of continuing to fight alongside the M23 rebels, a charge consistently denied by Kigali, who in turn accused the DRC of violating the agreement by incorporating troops from neighboring Burundi.
The consensus among analysts is that the lack of clearly defined monitoring mechanisms and the ambiguity regarding enforcement allowed underlying tensions to resurface rapidly. The White House spokesperson's assertion that peace is not an easy process and that President Trump merely expects all parties to honor their commitments while promising to hold them accountable without specifying the means of doing so, underscores the reliance placed primarily on the leader's goodwill and the personal authority of the American presidency.
Yet, as the situation in Southeast Asia and Central Africa demonstrates, personal assurances often prove insufficient when deep-seated territorial and ethnic conflicts are at play. Even the much-touted ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, widely regarded as the administration's most significant foreign policy success to date, has seen setbacks, with violence resuming and the crucial second phase, aimed at permanent peace and the disarmament of Hamas, stalling over fundamental disagreements. The simultaneous collapse or severe backsliding of these three high-profile accords suggests a pattern. The speed and simplicity of the Trumpian strategy, while initially effective in gathering leaders for a photo op and initial signing, appears to have prioritized the appearance of success over the painstaking, long-term work required to build durable peace mechanisms, institutionalizing safeguards, and resolving core disputes. Ultimately, the return to conflict in regions where peace was recently declared illustrates a critical lesson in international diplomacy. Sustainable peace is a marathon that requires intricate, detailed, and often tedious negotiations, addressing root causes, not merely a sprint to a quick political breakthrough. The consequences of attempting to simplify profound geopolitical complexity, as noted by observers, risk eroding trust between adversaries to a level even lower than before the negotiations began, thereby jeopardizing future opportunities for lasting resolution. The analysis and commentary presented in this video are based solely on publicly available sources and represent the channel's own perspective and interpretation of these complex international developments.